Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Jordan Tracy. Let's go inside Utah politics. We begin with our top story. A Utah court has put the controversial Constitutional Amendment D on hold, but has not taken it off the ballot. The judge ruled in favor of activist groups who claim the text on the ballot is misleading and that the legislature hadn't followed all the rules to get it to voters in time for November. The judge ruled that while the ballot texts say the amendment only clarifies what the voters and lawmakers can do with ballot initiatives, it actually gives more power to the legislature. However, they won't be reprinting ballots to remove the offending text. The state argued that could cost upwards of $3 million. So voters will still see Amendment D on the ballot, but votes on it will not count. The Utah Democratic Party is celebrating the ruling as a win, but Republican leaders in the legislature have made clear that they intend to appeal this up to the state Supreme Court. To understand this ruling a little better, it's important that we read the text of Amendment D. The proposed text that drew the lawsuit says in full, quote, should the Utah Constitution be changed to strengthen the initiative process by prohibiting foreign influence on ballot initiatives and referendums, clarifying the voters and legislative bodies' ability to amend laws. If approved, state law would also be changed to allow Utah citizens 50% more time to gather signatures for a statewide referendum, establish requirements for the legislature to follow the intent of a ballot initiative. Here to help us unpack this case is our good friend, Utah Republican Party Chair Rob Axen. You've been joining us a lot lately, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, good to be with Jordan.
Okay, let's start to unpack. There's a lot to unpack. I know it's kind of a complicated issue, but first, let me get your reaction for when that text came out. Obviously, you weren't a part of putting it together or writing the text. What was your reaction when you saw the text and it became a subject of a lawsuit?
So, you know, when I heard that text, when it came from the legislature and that specific verbiage, I saw nothing wrong with it. I firmly believe that that language stating that it is strengthening the citizen initiative process, I think that is valid. It extended the amount of time that is permitted for people to gather signatures, and it also made sure to restrict foreign influence on that. I think it's important for Utahns to be deciding for Utah what our policies should be and what state code or any initiative should look like. And so I see it as completely appropriate the way that it was written. I think it's quite unfortunate that a judge sees it differently.
So obviously what seemed to be the most popular part of this was that element of not allowing foreign entities to get into ballot initiatives or be involved with the promoting of them. Is it misleading to have that lead the text there in the sense that, okay, this is the popular thing. Voters are looking at a ballot. They're voting for a lot of obvious things. They see the first good thing that is extremely popular and they'll vote for it. Isn't that a little misleading to do that?
I don't think it is at all, and here's why. Because we have examples around the country where that very thing has played out. There are states where literally tens of millions of dollars are spent from outside groups coming into that, and tens of millions of dollars, sometimes even if you look at specific states, over the last 10 years, you have over $100 million from foreign entities that are weighing in and spending money in order to get voters within a community to vote one way or another on an initiative. And I think that is something that absolutely should be guarded against. This idea that Canada or Russia or China or the UK, doesn't matter, friend or ally, they shouldn't be making decisions for the people of the United States. They certainly shouldn't be making decisions for the people of Utah.
Which I think, and I agree, that was like the least controversial part of this text. But to try to clean this phrase up, it's like the bad news sandwich, where you give something good and then the controversial piece and then something good. That's what a lot of people are looking at this text and seeing that as kind of a bad news sandwich. You lead with the good stuff, you have like a quick line about the thing that's controversial, and then end it with more good stuff that most people agree with. So in that bad news sandwich setup that the text, and we'll show the text again. Do you, I mean, I'm going to ask, do you agree with it? I think you're going to say no, that it is a bad news sandwich. But tell me why it's not a bad news sandwich.
Yeah, no, I certainly don't, because I actually agree with all the elements of the sandwich.
Sure,
so
you agree with all.
Good,
you
good,
like
good.
the lettuce, you like the pickles.
I'm good with it.
Sure.
But let's assume that there is.
Well,
some
not everybody
concern.
does.
Yeah. So for those folks that look at that middle piece and they're like, yeah, I don't know where I stand on that, but I do like the first part. I do like the last part. well, that's okay, and that should be something that we entrust the voters of Utah to determine for themselves. I think assuming that the people of Utah, when reading that and when considering how to vote, are incapable of determining what they like and don't like simply because there was a lead out with something they agree with, I think that's disingenuous, and that's unfortunate anytime the courts or elected officials or anybody gets to this place where they don't trust us and our ability to read, understand, comprehend, and make a determination for ourselves.
I do want to get to that point about whether or not enough time, because that was another argument that was made in court, and that the judge ruled that they believe that it was a rushed process. But I want to talk more again about the language, because that first line, can we bring up the actual language? Because that first line talking about that it would strengthen the initiative process. To me, that sounds like leading the witness. Attorneys would look at that and say maybe, because whether you believe that this amendment would strengthen the ballot initiative process or not, putting that in the writing is leading the voter already to say, hey, this is a good thing. This is our way of strengthening the initiative process. In that way, that could be taken as misleading, could it not?
Again, if you are approaching things from the perspective that you don't believe that Utahns and individuals have the ability to critically consider what is being presented there, yeah, maybe it would be considered leading. I just don't buy into that. I truly believe that Utahns are capable of considering an initiative, considering a ballot proposal, considering verbiage, and understanding what it's presenting, and then weighing and determining where they want to land on that issue. I trust Utahns on this.
And so I want to talk about that ability to look at the issue, to do their research, and come up. This was called and voted on in a special session. Special sessions are called for emergencies. Explain to me why this was an emergency. Why did the legislature, and why do you believe, if you do, that this was an emergency? We had to have a special session. We couldn't wait to have more time for people to talk about this.
The reason actually goes back about 6 weeks to when the Utah Supreme Court completely changed the interpretation of our Utah state constitution. So you have nearly 100 years of history where it was understood and seen for what it was. Suddenly there's this change, and there's this giant question that is put to bear. The reason that it was an emergency is because the consequences of the people of Utah not determining for themselves where this was going to moving forward will lead to a lot of outside money being spent to try to influence where Utahns go on various issues. We don't know what those issues are yet, but we do know, not just anecdotally, but contractually, people have been reaching out, starting the process, hiring staff in Utah to start these ballot initiatives, because they now see that under this new interpretation, there's this potential for a free-for-all. I think that is certainly an emergency, and I commend the Utah legislature for trying to address it.
But I'm wondering if the Supreme Court, their ruling, actually did change a lot. I know a lot of the language for people who supported this amendment said that it created a vagueness. We don't know where the power of the legislature begins and ends. But strict scrutiny has been something that's been argued time and time again. It's not something new, and that was listed in the Supreme Court opinion. And also talked about the intent of the ballot initiative, which is language that's used in the amendment proposal as well. So because of that, did something really change from the Supreme Court, or did they lay it flat out? This is what you have to do. If the legislature wants to move, they have to prove that it has, the best interest of the state at heart, and also keeps the original intent of the ballot initiative. That seems pretty clear.
So that part, I agree, is clear. The problem is it's also clear in laying out a game plan for anybody running an initiative on what they need to do, what they need to include in the initiative in order to avoid any type of legislative oversight. Keep in mind the entire legislative citizen engagement that we have. In Utah, we're unique among 20-some-odd states that have ballot initiatives. Now only 3 that are interpreted this way. California and Arizona are the other 2.
I've heard Utah doesn't want to be California.
We certainly do not.
I've heard that a lot.
Certainly
I was in the debate the other night as well.
No, 100%. And I think, again, Utahns should decide what Utah is. But keep in mind, our state constitution bifurcates and gives 2 different ways for all of us as citizens to express our will: through a ballot initiative process and an equal mechanism that we have of electing our officials who will represent us in the spirit of a constitutional republic. That was it was in balance for over 100 years. We now have a place where, with this most recent ruling, they're leaning in on the one side. And so it's easy for people to say, well, this is a legislative power grab. I don't see it that way at all. What I see as the people of Utah now being limited in our ability to express ourselves through our elected officials. And that's the spirit of a constitutional republic. That's what allows for folks to be most closely accountable to all of us as voters. And when we need to make adjustments, whether it's quickly, whether it's a small tweak or a large tweak, we have the ability to do that through our legislators. We don't quickly or efficiently have the ability to do that through ballot initiatives.
But I would push back on that and say, while we talk about that balance, the legislature representative, but they're elected by direct democracy. There's no electoral college in Utah. One vote counts to elect those to office. But I'd also say, that was written in the Utah State Constitution to have this ballot initiative to give people that direct power to change the course of their state government. So can you explain more for me where you see that imbalance? Because it feels like there's that one way, and the voters can decide the course of their state government, and then there's laws that are made by lawmakers.
The key thing is no elected official, no law that I have seen in Utah or throughout history really stands the test of time. We have principles that do. We certainly have liberties and freedoms under our Constitution that stand the test of time. But the application of law should always be in a place where we can make those adjustments. What is at the core of what our people need, our communities need? What are the needs of our rural citizens and our urban citizens? These are questions that you can quickly consider through the legislative process. You can't do that except through a very expensive initiative process. If we suddenly have these initiatives, that something gets passed through, whether it has an intended consequence or an unintended consequence. Any fix would now have to be done through a ballot initiative. That's very costly, it's very difficult, and again, if you have an unintended consequence even that is detrimental to the way of life and to the people of Utah, what's the recourse? How can you fix that? And I just believe that we're better off in a place where through that constitutional republic system of elected representatives, we can engage, we can hold them accountable, we can vote them in and out of office, and most importantly, we can talk to them and make sure that they're hearing our perspective and addressing it appropriately.
All right, Rob, thank you very much for having this discussion with me. And I have a feeling this discussion on Amendment D does not stop here with us.
We're going to keep on going, aren't we?
It will continue. All right, Rob, thank you very much. Still ahead on Inside Utah Politics, will the real Lyman for governor please stand up? How the field of Lyman write-ins grew from 1 to 3 and the controversy that came along with it. And coming up, big tech strikes back, how a court ruling is holding up Utah's efforts to regulate kids on social media. Stay with us. Welcome back. Mail-in ballots for the November election are starting to go out, but state and local election officials from across the country are warning that widespread problems with the mail delivery system threaten to disrupt voting. Washington correspondent Jesse Turner reports on a letter they sent to the U.S. Postal Service.
It's unacceptable.
Members of Congress and election officials around the country are raising concerns about mail-in ballot delays because of the U.S. Postal Service.
The people expect the mail to be delivered on time.
A bipartisan group of state election officials sent this letter to the Postmaster General, warning even in their primary elections this year, returned ballots postmarked on time arrived days after the deadline. They say properly addressed election mail also returned as undeliverable, which could automatically label voters as inactive.
There's plenty of time to get to the bottom of it and fix it, but it is concerning. Missouri
Senator Eric Schmidt says the issues highlight his reservations with mail-in voting.
Evidence is that's where it's most ripe for fraud, by the way, but I think it's always safest to vote in person.
Voter confidence in mail-in voting was a focus of a House committee hearing Wednesday with 6 secretaries of state.
Over 80% of our ballots on average now are by mail, and that means every single one of those ballots has to be signature verified.
Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes says he trusts his office to confirm voters are who they say they are.
These are the same people trained by the trainers who train the FBI.
Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose says his office is also capable of handling mailed ballots, but does not support vote by mail for everyone.
We don't mail out unsolicited absentee ballots, which would be a foolish idea.
Voters in Ohio and Arizona can track their mail-in ballots online. Only 3 states do not offer that. In Washington, I'm Jesse Tenor.
Meantime, local leaders are continuing to work to keep the Sundance Film Festival. Sundance's list of its top 3 cities to call home starting in 2027 came out this past week. It includes Boulder, Colorado, Cincinnati, Ohio, and Park City and Salt Lake City as joint hosts. The festival first expressed a desire to possibly leave Utah earlier this year. A statement from the mayors of Park City, Salt Lake City, and Salt Lake County says they're committed to keeping Sundance in Utah and helping it continue to grow. New regulations on social media in Utah are on hold. A federal judge issued an injunction against the Utah Minor Protection in Social Media Act, which was set to take effect next month. It comes after a nonprofit representing big tech companies sued the state of Utah, arguing the law would violate the First Amendment. This is a law that would have required companies to adopt an age verification system for minors and special privacy setting for their accounts. Nonprofit NetChoice is celebrating this as a win.
We believe that this is a massive government overreach that takes away control from parents and puts it into the hands of politicians.
Governor Spencer
Both Governor Cox and the Attorney General expressed their disappointment in the ruling and say the state is figuring out what to do next. ABC4 News has been working to unpack confusion around some write-in campaigns for governor. Representative Phil Lyman running as a write-in candidate for governor after Governor Spencer Cox beat him in the primary. But he's not the only Lyman who has filed to run as a write-in, and this is where it gets complicated. Now, a Richard Lyman and Carol Lyman are also running for governor and lieutenant governor, respectively, as an unaffiliated write-in candidate. Now, Richard is the son, Carol is the mother, and not related to Phil Lyman. The original Lyman, Phil Lyman, is accusing Spencer Cox's campaign of paying Richard and Carol Lyman to join the race and confuse voters. The Cox campaign is denying any role in this. They're saying, quote, Phil Lyman has a habit of making accusations that are blatantly false. Now, this is no exception. Phil should go back to filming ads to help his cousin and liberal Democrat Brien King. Now, Phil Lyman put out these tweets showing text messages from a man named James. James claims that he works with Richard Lyman and that Richard was offered a steak dinner and $1,000 by the Cox campaign to run as a write-in candidate. Strange, right? So we tracked down James and asked him straight up, did Richard Lyman tell him these things and implicate that the Cox campaign did this? And James said yes, and then he did this.
I actually sent a message to my wife telling her what had just gone on because, you know, she's into politics. I'm not so much. And she said, I'm going to send this to Phil Lyman. And I said, well, okay. And then I sent Rich some texts because I was worried maybe what he was doing was illegal. And I thought it would be a good idea for him to record the conversation. He said he would, and that's the last I've heard about any of it.
James told us that Richard seems to be backtracking now and is distancing himself from the Cox allegations. Now, we couldn't get a hold of Richard, but we talked with his mother and running mate Carol. Neither want to appear on camera, but Carol sent us this statement, which reads, in part, Governor Cox's campaign is not paying us. I actually paid the fees for both of us. Period. We're running to make a statement. People keep asking if we're related to Phil Lyman, and last Sunday someone asked, and it was the straw that broke the camel's back. I've always been proud of my name, and the negativity of his campaign is causing me real embarrassment. Richard and I talked about it and decided to run so that we had a candidate we could feel good about voting for because we don't feel good about voting for Cox or Phil Lyman. So Phil Lyman claims this is a move by Cox campaign to confuse voters. The Cox campaign denies this. And the other Lyman say they don't like Cox or Phil Lyman. And James says he's concerned about wrongdoing and felt a duty to report his conversation with Richard Lyman. By the way, James says he's voting for Phil Lyman. We'll keep looking into this and bring you updates as we learn more. Now, following this past week's debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, both sides are spinning the face-off as a win for their team. Washington correspondent Trevor Shirley is in D.C. with a look at how they're making that case.
Republicans say Vice President Harris failed to give many policy specifics during last night's debate, while Democrats say former President Trump showed he's not fit for a second term. After a quick, cordial handshake, the barbs began to fly.
He is more interested in defending himself than he is in looking out for you.
She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist.
What we have done is clean up Donald Trump's mess.
She copied Biden's plan, and it's like 4 sentences. Like run, spot, run.
For an hour and a half, both candidates went back and forth on topics including abortion, the economy, and immigration, with each claiming success after leaving the stage.
This was my best debate. I thought it was very good.
We have a lot of work to do, okay? And tonight, I think, highlighted for the American people what's at stake.
At times, Harris dodged several questions, including a direct inquiry about whether Americans are better off now than under the Trump presidency.
Most importantly, she can't talk about her record. She has been the vice president for 3.5 years.
But the former president often struggled to stay on message, missing several chances to hit Harris's record.
Anyone who's undecided can see the difference here. We've got a person who is presidential in Kamala Harris. She has made a convincing case that we need a new way forward.
The Harris campaign says it's ready for a second debate, while former President Trump says he's not sure if there will actually be a second face-off. Reporting in Washington, I'm Trevor Shirley.
Thank you, Trevor. We also held a panel of local experts here in Utah to follow the debate. See if you'd like to see our conversation. You can find that on abc4.com and our YouTube page. Well, coming up, 3 visions for the future of Utah clash on stage. How the 3 biggest campaigns for governor made their cases to the public.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Welcome back. Here at your local election headquarters, we're following the first debate of Utah's 2024 gubernatorial election. 3 candidates for Utah's next governor squared off at the Salt Lake Community College. I was there for the full hour of argument between Republican Governor Spencer Cox, Democrat Representative Brien King, and Libertarian lawyer Robert Latham. And now we're bringing you the highlights.
3 candidates facing off on the top issues on the minds of Utahns, like the economy.
I'm proud that Utah has led the nation over my tenure as governor over the past 4 years in economic growth. It is incredible what is happening here. This is the golden age of Utah. And yes, there are some growth challenges that we face.
We do not want to have families who have to work a second or a third job simply to provide Christmas for their children. That's something that this administration is not focused on to the degree that they need to be, looking after working class, middle class Utahns.
Libertarian candidate Robert Latham linking the economy to housing policy.
And so disappointed in what I've seen coming out of the legislature and then signed off by the governor, what I consider crony developer capitalism. And these bills that have recently been passed where there's a $20,000 or some subsidy to buy a new home, well, guess what? Now the price of housing is 20% higher. That's just basic economics.
And we have come up with a plan, again, to build 35,000 starter homes over the next 5 years, homes that our kids and grandkids can afford. I shudder to think what our country will be like if we have a generation of people who can't afford real property.
We've got out-of-state investors and speculators who are buying up Utah properties solely because they think it's a great investment, and that is jacking up the price of our homes. There's got to be something that we can do, and we should do something to make sure that Utah families have the first shot.
And Democrat Brien King and Governor Cox going at it over the governor's change of heart on former President Donald Trump.
My morals haven't changed at all. In fact, they've only strengthened in really trying desperately to help him and our party do better and be better. And again, I don't pretend like he's going to care at all about what I think.
But for the governor to endorse an individual who has such vile language when it comes to immigration makes me, well, I think it's disqualifying in terms of anybody voting for him for a second term.
Stay with us. More Inside Utah Politics is coming up after the break. That does it for today's Inside Utah Politics. Don't forget, if you have any local political stories you'd like to see, make sure to reach out. Thanks for being with us, everyone. We'll see you next week when we go Inside Utah Politics.